Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. On this episode of the 3324 podcast, we're going to visit with a group widely given credit for being the creators of heavy metal. But were they really? We're going to talk about that and the riff extravaganza that is Led Zeppelin II. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Erik Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Erik, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, everybody, to the 3324 podcast. My name is Dean Legiro, and I'm here with Erik Kuber.
Hi there. How you doing?
So we're going to be talking about Led Zeppelin II today. As we always start off, we're going to give you some vital stats, and that's just some of the nuts and bolts technical stuff. Look at that out of the way so you have a little bit of background. The year that this came out was 1969, and it's actually the second album that Led Zeppelin put out in the same year. So Led Zeppelin II came out later in late 1969, but the debut, just known as Led Zeppelin, came out in the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty, that's pretty prolific for a new band. This album, Led Zeppelin II, had a 400,000 copy advance order. So people were already excited about this, or the record company felt confident enough to make this order and be confident would sell. And by 1970, it had sold 3 million copies. So we're talking today about a monster out of the gate. Yeah. Not a slow roll, but longevity.
That's a beast right there.
It is. Chart performance, I think it's going to go without saying, but when people say that, they say it anyway. So we're going to say it. It went to number 1, and it unseated probably one of the hardest albums to knock off of number 1. It unseated Abbey Road from the number 1 spot. So if you're going to knock somebody off, it might as well be the Beatles with arguably their strongest album. Mm-hmm. Overall, 12 times platinum. So we're talking 12 million overall. There was 2 singles released from this. Whole Lotta Love, which went to number 4, and Living, Lovin' Made, which hit number 65. So that really stalled out and didn't go anywhere significant.
Right.
And the producer was Jimmy Page.
Jimmy Page. He was credited as the producer. I think the band pretty much conceded to him being the overall producer of the record. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to get into a little bit about Jimmy Page, and it'll probably make sense why he should be the producer or why he was. Everyone just thinks about Jimmy Page. We're going to get ahead, but everyone thinks about Jimmy Page as just this guitar guy and slinging these licks. But there's a little bit more to him. So we'll hit that probably in about 2 minutes. What's your history with Led Zeppelin?
Really early on, I guess. I mean, this album specifically actually I remember it being in my record cabinet. My brother must have bought it. I don't know, somehow albums just magically appeared. You open the record cabinet, there's a new album, and I'm kind of going through. This album was one of those albums. I would hear him listen to it pretty early on, and I really dug a lot of the guitar riffs that we were going to talk about. So that really struck me right away about it. Someone who really doesn't know anything at that point. I think I might have been 5 or 6 when I first heard it.
That's like a cradle. Like Baby in the Cradle.
Yeah. Yeah. So, my brother would play these records and, drive my mom crazy and, that kind of thing. So it was pretty early on. Of course I didn't know who these people were, but that's my first experience with Led Zeppelin. So,
yeah, I think that much like the Beatles, everybody has heard a Led Zeppelin song, whether or not you know it. And they're pretty much Stairway to Heaven has in every chart. every like it's been the number one song in when they do like they'll do their Memorial Day weekend countdown of the greatest hits, and inevitably Stairway to Heaven is number one. So I think everybody knows a Led Zeppelin song, whether they think they do or not. And I think because of the riffs and everything that we're going to talk about, a lot of it ended up getting sampled in rap music and in other artists. So you probably have heard it but not realized it, and you absolutely can't escape it. I kind of came to Zeppelin late in life, only because it's, you listen to rock radio when you're young, so you hear that kind of stuff, but I didn't go out and buy a Zeppelin album or CD until probably Zeppelin IV on cassette, because that's the one you get. It's got Stairway to Heaven on it. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to get that one because that's the number one song that I'm being told is the number one song of all time on the radio. So I'll pick up Zeppelin IV or Zoso or Cymbals, whatever. Everyone's got a different name for it. The guy with the sticks on his back, there's everyone's got something for it. So that's the one that usually everybody gets. And that was my entree into it. Mm-hmm. And then I did go back to Zeppelin II, because when I looked at that track listing, when I'm looking to get something else, I was like, wow, this one is chock full of the riffs. Yeah. Or maybe it might have been actually there was a box set that came out in 1990, a 4-disc Zeppelin CD set. And I bought that. And that might have prompted me to pick up Led Zeppelin II. I'll tell you why, because it had Heartbreaker on it, but it didn't have Living, Lovin' Maid on the box set. And I didn't understand why. And we'll get to those two songs, because they're linked in a unique way. And when I got the CD, I'm like, it's not on here. Why isn't it? So then I had to go out and get Led Zeppelin II. So that's the history there. And I love hearing that we're coming from different areas on it and different approaches. You were basically drinking from a bottle and listening to it, and I might have been drinking from a bottle, but it might have been beer by the time I got to it. So we were drinking from different bottles, but we both got there. So let's do a little brief history. Mm-hmm. And it's important that I think there's two things that are important that were going on. One of them is Jimmy Page, before Led Zeppelin, was really a session musician. Yeah.
Pretty straightforward. Yeah. He did a lot of session work. He came up with the likes of Clapton, Jeff Beck. He did. I can't really think of anything. I know he played with a few blues artists. I think they kind of worked together. Did appear in the Yardbirds. It was Clapton first, and then Jeff Beck, and then Jimmy Page joined the Yardbirds. So it was like that succession of the main three, as it were.
And actually with the Yardbirds, he was such a prolific session worker that when Clapton left the Yardbirds, they had asked Page to join. They said, hey, will you take his place? And Jimmy Page was like, you know what? I'm really comfortable and making a good living as a session man. Yeah. So I'm going to decline the offer, but why don't you ask my friend, Jeff Beck? Mm-hmm. And that's what they did. So Jeff Beck, and this is like the holy trinity of blues guitarists that we're talking about. So if you go search the Yardbirds, it's kind of like they're interchanging one with another. They're friends, and they're actually helping each other out, because, Page was like, I'm going to take a pass on this right now. But you know what? Jeff Beck, go for him. So they did. And that was after Clapton left, and Clapton would go on to other things also, which we'll touch on. But then what happened is the bass player for the Yardbirds left. So they asked Jimmy Page again, and he's like, all right, I'll fill in there. So at one point it was Beck and Page playing together, because then Page did end up playing guitar. So the other part of this story is what we just talked about, is this growing British blues style of music. A lot of these young guitar players became enamored with American blues.
Right. And, it was, well, I get different perspectives, but I guess they kind of all had the same tastes. Some of them maybe slightly more on the rock and roll side of things. The big guys like Elvis and Chuck Berry, a little bit more R&B influence. Like, I know Jeff Beck was a big fan of that kind of stuff, and Page too. But they all, they all like Robert Johnson. They all like Willie Dixon. They all liked, some of the names that actually appear on this record. So, they do 3 covers of that are blues covers. But the thing of it was putting their own spin on it, taking, traditional blues but adding something to it, which was the birth of something really, really great in those days, like the 60s. The psychedelic rock was coming into fray. You think of bands like Cream. Clapton joined Cream. He thought he was going to be pretty much leading just a blues trio, not realizing what Cream would ultimately become, this super group of 3 virtuosic musicians, really taking the blues and really expanding on it and making it something unique. And Jimmy Page pretty much did the same thing.
Yeah, and that's what's important is this nucleus of blues players.
Yeah,
because Clapton also played in John Mayall's Blues Breakers.
Mm-hmm. Well,
which was like another
yeah.
seeding ground for Fleetwood Mac rose out of that with Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, and Peter Green. So you've got this fertile English subculture of blues purists that are, well, they're purists meaning they like blues, but they're putting their own spin. You're absolutely right. There's the psychedelia was still going strong. There was the hippie stuff. There was still pop stuff that was really popular. So they're immersed in that, but the basis is the blues.
It was, I think to them, it was something exotic. It wasn't the straight up rock and roll with a lot of rhythm guitar playing and sort of the pop hits of the day. They weren't interested in that. And indeed, when Clapton left the Yardbirds, they were starting to go that pop route, and which is why he left, because they started out as a sort of a bluesier band. They kind of remained that way with Page and Beck. So I think they probably had those kind of sensibilities too, to move on and to do something a little bit more and taking this really exotic music and making it their own. So yeah, the birth of Zeppelin, Jeff Beck would actually go on to do other things, more of a jazz kind of route, I think. In the 70s, he would take a more like jazz fusion and a little bit of heavy metal, sort of hard rock. But what Page and Clapton did was much more blues based, of like minds. Even though, from what I hear, Eric Clapton's not really a fan of Led Zeppelin.
No,
so, he's more of a purist. So he didn't care for the high pitched vocals and the screaming guitars, and he kind of, which is odd because Cream was doing that. They were loud, they were plugged in, they were expanding, and it's kind of funny that he would think that way. But after he left Cream, I guess he became much more of a purist, whereas Page wanted to do something far more experimental.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And the interesting part of this story is, the Yardbirds were a very popular group in England, a little less so in the United States. But what ended up happening is they had kind of peaked. And when Page was with the group, the fortunes had started to turn. So they really weren't, they were basically on the down slope of their existence for the most part. So what happens is 3 members quit the Yardbirds. And Jimmy Page was basically left with the rights to the band. Like he was the only guy left in the band, essentially. So he had control of the band, but they had contractual concert obligations, I think in Sweden or Denmark or somewhere. Mm-hmm. So the Yardbirds had to still play concerts, even though there was nobody left. So so he's like a band without a band, and he's got these obligations. They have to do these concerts. So he recruits John Paul Jones on bass. So there's one. Mm-hmm. Robert Plant, plucked from obscurity, didn't do anything significant. And the amazing thing about Robert Plant is he's like 20 years old. Plant brought John Bonham with him on drums. So they were going to be called the New Yardbirds. And I think it's a masterstroke that they weren't, because I think that at that point, the Yardbirds would have been an albatross around their neck of a band that was already on the decline. Basically you've revamped the whole lineup anyway, so why not just go with something different? So I think that was really a smart move.
Sure. I heard a rumor too that it was actually John Entwistle or Keith Moon who came up with the name Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, because there was talk about a super
to that effect. Yeah.
There was talk about like Page being in a group with Moon and someone else. I guess all these people ran in the same circle, so it's not.
So the infighting with the Who and
it's not surprising. Yeah, and it's not surprising that these band members would slide in and out. Like Clapton would leave, Beck would come in, and then Page would come in. We think of them always groups as like entities unto themselves, but I think the realization is that all these guys knew each other back then, especially England, which is a small country. So you got no choice but to run into each other and make acquaintances and then talk about, hey, let's do this and that. So So yeah, they Entwistle supposedly famously coined it that this new supergroup would go over like a Led Zeppelin, which means it would never take off. Page filed that name away until later when the new Yardbirds. Just a quick story about Jimmy Page meeting Robert Plant for the first time. So a friend of Jimmy Page's took him to go see Robert Plant sing, and Page was like, is there something wrong with this guy? Like, is he a jerk, or is there something with him? Because Page couldn't understand that a guy with this type of a voice and presence, he couldn't understand why he wasn't popular yet. So he thought that there must have been something wrong with him.
Yeah.
like what's this guy's deal? Because
That's interesting.
why isn't he popular? And so then Page got to meet him and said, you know what, I got on great with him, and the rest was history. So that's a funny thing is he's looking at the guy so enamored with him, and is like, what am I missing here? Yeah, what are you doing? What am I not being told about this guy? So I thought that was kind of funny. That's a great story. So they put out their first album, like I said, in the beginning of 1969. And again, if you go look up like albums that came out in 69, these guys are caught up in a tidal wave of amazing music. So the first Led Zeppelin album comes out in the beginning of the year, and it does pretty well. The song that everybody pretty much knows is Good Times, Bad Times. And there's a whole bunch of other ones, Dazed and Confused. I mean, it's almost like the Beatles. Every song is like a hit, to rock music fans.
Right.
So then later on in the year, Zeppelin II comes out. We're going to talk about that now. So we're going to really dive into Zeppelin II. I have two words to describe Led Zeppelin II. Riff, Nirvana. This is like... like every song. This is where I think the Zeppelin legend was cemented. In this album is, it's got 9 songs, but there are so many iconic and epic riffs that everybody knows on this album that it's just it totally is a leap from the first album. And on this album, even though the Zeppelin, the first one and 2 came out in the same year, Plant does not really sound the same. He does on the first album, Zeppelin 1, he kind of sounded like a young guy. On Zeppelin 2, he does not sound like a 21-year-old guy. You got to remember, 21 years old and a whole lot of love, and it doesn't sound like a guy that young. He had progressed so much in his vocalizations and his style and his velocity or whatever however he was singing, that it really was. I think that was part of the leap. Is besides the riffs and Page kind of coming in to figure out what this was going to be, was Plant also coming along as the vocalist, because he kind of had to.
It's a much stronger release, and that's very odd considering that the songs were actually written while they were touring, and they would not record. Every song was recorded in a different studio with a different engineer, and it was kind of like, I think Plant would describe it as kind of a inconsistent mess. It just wasn't gelling. Like with each track, they were different, and it's a testament to Page, who kind of pulled it all together with engineer Eddie Kramer. And this would be the first appearance of the mainstay engineer that he would work with them from this point on. But it's Page's. It's the overall mix of the album that you would never know listening to this thing, that it was recorded sporadically all over America, all over, in the UK, in multiple studios, some of which were not up to code. They were kind of, just real shitholes, and, a couple of them just, more or less. And, and it's a triumph of an album. It's strong. The production value is strong on it. So this really kickstarted, I think, Jimmy Page as a producer. And I think that's why pretty much the band kind of conceded, saying, yeah, you're the man for this. You got the ear, you pull this all together. So there.
Robert Plant's fears are not without merit, because it can be very easy to feel disconnected. If a band gets together and they go into the recording studio, you want to knock that whole thing out. You want to get the album done. You're in the groove. You're collaborating. So if you're in New York and you're recording something here, and then you're at another studio recording something here, it is very easy to feel disjointed, and you would never know. Like you said, you would never know on this album. This sounds like it was done. It actually sounds like it was knocked off pretty quick. because there's not a lot with Led Zeppelin, at least with this album, there's not a lot that needs to get done. They would definitely expand their sound album to album and really open it up. But this one is it's guitars, it's vocals, it's bass, it's drums. And all three of them, the instruments and then the vocal instrument, they all stand on their own. So I think that's maybe a testament to the simplicity also of what Page was trying to do, that you could record it somewhere and record another one elsewhere, because you weren't trying to, you weren't using a symphony and you had to get those musicians back and it sounds a certain way. The fact that this was really kind of stripped down in that aspect lent itself to being able to get these things done on the road and let's book some time here and we'll get this one done, and then putting it all together, which was masterful.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a beast of an album, and getting into the riff. A lot of these riffs, I mean, you can't think of any like sort of hard rock, heavy metal band. The influence is just there. I mean, these riffs are that familiar, even though they're not actually ripping them off per se, but they're just, the riffs are just, you could see how it's influenced the likes of, Black Sabbath and down the road, Iron Maiden, and then of course, Metallica and, all these other bands. And they all had that, like AC/DC, they all had that in common, those major riffs.
Yeah. So, and the whole riffing thing it's easy to take it for granted, I think also. You hear these riffs so often on the radio that you just take it for granted but when you sit down and listen to the album, and I listened to this one a lot in preparation, I really kind of I think like 4 times. And each time I find more. And that's what I love about music, is if you're open to it, and even stuff that you take for granted, like I take, certain songs for granted because I've heard them so many times. But then if you actually just stop and let yourself back in, you hear more. And I'm so glad that I think on the 4th time I picked up some other nuances, and I'm like, wow, I like this song. Even I loved it before, I double love it now. So let's jump in. Let's jump into some of these tracks, and this is going to be really, this is almost like a Led Zeppelin's greatest hits, you could call it. I mean, this one is just, it's got everything. So it starts out with Whole Lotta Love, which is actually, they didn't actually write it. It was, ended up Willie Dixon. They kind of lifted it, and that's something that we're going to get into also. But when it is the blues, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. So a lot of these songs are adapted, or the lyrics are similar enough where it's unmistakably that they're adapting something. So it starts out with Whole Lotta Love.
I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm sure a lot of people lost their virginity to this song.
Oh.
I'm just going to go there right out the gate. I'm sorry, but it's, there's no mistaking what this song is talking about. And so, of course, my brother would always brag that this might have been one of those songs that, whatever, but we'll.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. And a lot of blues songs were about that. And yes. That's one of the things about these songs, especially the ones that were originally blues songs. There's a lot of innuendo, but it ain't that subtle. So they're not really shrouding that they're talking about sex, and they mentioned, and we'll get to some other songs where it's even more like blatant, and they're really not hiding it. So
it's not even just the lyrics; it's the music too. It's those heavy, like those chords, those very exotic, very sexy. That's why I love blues. I find it extremely sexy. Music in general. They could be talking about the worst things in the world going on to them, whatever personally, but I always love those classic riffs and just the underlying sexiness of it. It's erotic. It's, so of course they would take that to the next level with this track and creating all these weird in the middle of the song, all this strange kind of soundscape of what's going on there. But by the end of it, you kind of, okay, I get it. I get what they're doing here. So, you can't mistake it.
And this would start a Whole Lotta Love would literally is like the first shot across the bow of these epic riffs that Page would come up with. Yeah. And this one, the thing about this one is it's the same riff over and over, and it's unrelenting. It's pounding. And really what I found about this song is I like that guitar work actually better than the solos. I think overall on Zeppelin II, I don't think it's Page's strongest guitar solo work, honestly. I find myself really getting back into the groove when the solo's over it and they kick back into overdrive and they're back into the pulsing groove and the riff, and he just keeps nailing it. So for me, Whole Lot of Love is just that unrelenting riff that just doesn't stop. And
it's all rhythm. John Paul Jones on this, the bass line, Bonham with those heavy drums. I mean, he was kicking. This is widely considered to be, I think it's known as their hardest album. Do you agree with that?
I would not disagree with that, just because it's so riff heavy.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things. So, and oddly enough, the next song though is, and this is the beauty of this album, is it's riff heavy, but you're not going to get blasted over the head with it. And that's what makes each one of these memorable too. I think if a lot of these songs, if the order was different, a lot of these riffs would almost get blurred together, or you would just get kind of numb to it. So the next song is What Is and Should Never Be.
Which is my favorite track off the album.
It's just a great, great song.
Of this song. I love that slow groove. Plant has never been sexier as a singer, just leading, and then he kicks into that high pitched voice, and when the song kicks in, the drums, and it's amazing. It's just it remains as probably one of my all time favorite Zeppelin songs.
And I'm going to say I'm going to backtrack a little bit and say how I didn't like Page's guitar solo work for the most part. This is the only song that I really like the guitar work, because it is a little bit more soulful. It's not blasting notes out like a shotgun. And it really it enhances this song. It's in line with it, and I think it fits a lot more. And then John Paul Jones, his work on this too, we can't really understate what he's always behind the scenes. He's always like a background guy, but he just supports Page in the right way. It's so important. But he gets a little action on this one.
That rhythm section is just a monster. Paul Jones and Bonham together, they're arguably one of the greatest rhythm sections of any band.
Absolutely. No disagreement. You will not get I'm not saying they're my favorite bass player and my favorite drummer, by no means. They're not, but you cannot discount what they bring and what Bonham's particular talent as a drummer, kind of like Keith Moon. They have a particular talent that fit Moon's particular talent and way of playing fit the Who, that kind of unbound thing. And Bonham is the same thing here. What he brings to this is a little bit, the grooves are straight ahead, the riffs are straight ahead, but Bonham is in the back just kind of doing some different stuff and kind of keep, and that's maybe one of the things that always frustrated me about Bonham, and that's why he's not my favorite, is because I could never predict him. Mm-hmm. His stuff would be a little off tempo or just putting a snare drum where I wasn't expecting one. So I'm trying to like play along or tap along, and then it's changing. I'm like, what is this guy doing? Like, it would frustrate me, but that's the brilliance of it, is that he was able to keep you guessing and thereby keep you engaged.
Yeah. And that's what a good drummer should do, or at least a lot of the drummers back then did, was to kind of step out of those main beats and just sort of play behind the beat, or come up with some odd riff and it's not in the exact time or whatever. So yeah, it's unique. He was unique in that sense. But his drums, but he had that heavy foot, that bass drum. I mean, it's just killer. I can't think of any other drummer like that, really. No. I mean, as far as the heaviness of those drums, it was real rock and roll drums. I mean, you spoke of Keith Moon. He was a maniac. He was all over the kit, all over the place. But there's a sort of relentlessness to John Bonham's playing that is just, I'm here, deal with it, kind of thing. He was amazing.
Yeah, so, and he also needs to be also grounded though to support what. It's not like he's just playing whatever he wants for the sake of it. I mean, he's doing those different things, but he needs to be in support, because when you're playing the blues, you have to get back in. You've got to really support what the structure of the song is. So he was, just really masterful at that. Mm-hmm. So speaking of more blues, the next song is the Lemon Song, which is a rewrite and credited to Chester Burnett, which is better known as Howlin Wolf in the blues circuit. And Howlin Wolf had a song called Killing Floor. This is essentially a rewrite, and basically a lot of the songs that Led Zeppelin got in trouble for is they got in trouble for after. They didn't do these songs with permission. They did Whole Lotta Love and Willie Dixon afterward, came after him. And they did the Lemon song, and Howlin Wolf's record label or wherever came afterwards. So is there a little bit, you could say, is there some plagiarism going on, or are they honoring them? Or, I think there's a little bit of everything in there, obviously, because they weren't trying to hide it. It's not like they, changed the lyrics, but the melody was the same. They're basically singing the song. So they are really showing their love for the blues on this album also by picking, blues songs. But these songs were like from the 60s, like early 60s blues songs. So these aren't like the 1932 Robert Johnson stuff. So it's relatively recent too. So I don't know if they were kidding themselves that maybe they thought they were going to get away with something that was so recent.
Well, the thing of it was too, was a lot of these blues players they didn't have the solid record contracts that, a lot of these guys had. So you could argue that, I mean, especially if you go way back, like Robert Johnson's time, even, that the songs almost became public domain and so a lot of these blues artists would cover each other back in the day, and they would come up together, but they would, if somebody came out with a great song, hey, I'm going to play that too. So the songs were more or less, there was really no sense of publishing rights or anything back then. There was just, the songs were just out there. I don't know if that same thing was going on at this point in time, but that could be part of it. That could explain why these songs were so easily adaptable, and so why they just pick this particular song to do for whatever reason. Maybe they just couldn't come after them or something. I mean, it was just so divided too. You got to remember that the songs were just almost out there for everyone to pick up and just do what they will with it. So, but yeah,
Whole Lotta Love didn't go to court or settlement until 1985. So that was well after they decided to. Killing Floor, which is the Lemon song, that was pretty much right there. It's like, well, you took this song, and I think he got like a check for $45,000, Howlin Wolf, and that was settled. So we're talking about innuendos. Well, this is the song that's got the most overt innuendo. Squeeze my lemon till the juice runs down my leg. If you think that that's about a lemon and lemonade, this might not be the podcast for you. Or you may need to look it up. So like I said, with the blues and the innuendo and saying it in a different way, and the way Plant delivers it on this song is just, there's no other way to think about it. He's not talking about citrus.
No, not at all. And we'll just leave it at that.
He's not.
No, he's not.
So check it out. And if you've never heard the Lemon song, it's a great song. It's just a great, it's really good. I love it. And then this follows up with Thank You. And this closes out the first side if we're talking about album cassette. This was the first song that Plant actually wrote all the lyrics to. He had been co-writer on some other stuff, but this one was totally written by him. And what it did, from Jimmy Page's point of view, is it reassured him that Plant could actually handle songwriting duties. And Page actually felt a little better backing away from that and letting him do that. And Thank You was written about his wife. And if you listen to the song, you're not going to get any other message. It's just a beautiful song. It's a beautiful, great like debut of a fully written, it really is, lyric.
My second favorite track off the record. I love the riff on this one too. The guitar riff that starts it off. It almost sounds like what later you would hear this kind of riff later on Physical Graffiti, albums of that vein. Like 10 Years Gone comes to mind. That great riff on that is a little bit slower, but it kind of reminds me of that. Yeah, it's another gem, another evergreen.
Such a great song, and so it closes out, and that's a slow song. It's certainly not a blues song, and it does signal a different direction also for Led Zeppelin. So once Plant comes into his own, you're going to see something change eventually, but not before we get to side 2 and Heartbreaker. Just want to take a quick moment and thank you for listening. Your support means so much to Erik and I. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please subscribe. It would be awesome. And if you're using Apple Podcasts, a rating and review would be doubly awesome. And your feedback is invaluable. So let's keep the conversation going on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 Podcast. You can let us know how we're doing. If you have any requests, you can post them there. Or if you just want to talk about one of the episodes or ask a question, we'd love to interact with you, and we absolutely look forward to it. Thanks. Let's get back to the show. As iconic as Whole Lotta Love is to open the first side, I think Heartbreaker, for me, I think it ups the ante. I like that riff. Like that riff, yeah. It's unmistakable, but I just really like it a lot more. And what I like about it also, which I caught on my last listen, was in between the riff, he's just doing some little guitar, I don't know, slides up and down the neck or whatever he's doing, but it sounds like the guitar is growling. He's getting just a really interesting sound in between each riff. So he's firing off these riffs at will.
Absolutely.
But in between, he's working the neck, and you just hear these other sounds he's getting. And then the bass from John Paul Jones is so thick and deep, it sounds like it's melded to the guitar. It sounds like it's one sound. You actually can't, for me, I almost can't pick out the bass being plucked. Like sometimes you could hear the bass being played. This is so thick and heavy, and it's so pushed into the guitar that it just sounds like it's like one sound, which is so beautiful.
It's almost like one guy playing it's playing both parts simultaneously.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. It's that close. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And then the best thing about Heartbreaker, and this kind of set the stage for We Will Rock You by Queen, right? When We Will Rock You by Queen is played on the radio immediately after We Are the Champions is played. You will never hear, unless it's a really bad radio station, We Will Rock You and then We Are the Champions. They're two totally different songs, but they're always played they're always played, their lead in, it's a lead in song. Yeah. And that's how you heard those songs on the radio. You did not hear We Will Rock You without We Are the Champions. Well, Zeppelin really started this because Heartbreaker ends and Living, Loving, Maid kicks off not even a second after. So they're not mixed together. They don't fade into each other. It just, Living, Loving, Maid just starts so quickly that when they played Heartbreaker on the radio, and that's how I grew up, hearing Heartbreaker and Living, Loving, Maid as one complete thought. And that's what pissed me off. Right. We got to is when I bought the CD box set and I'm listening to Heartbreaker and Living, Loving, Maid is not right after. And I'm like, what are they doing? Do they not understand how this went on rock radio?
Right. It was a staple. It was a given that these two songs were one almost. It was just, it's right into one another. And it's you've heard it for that way for years. And it's odd to hear them separated. It really is. I mean, and then like you said, the cassette, actually, I think side one on the cassette ends with Heartbreaker, and Living, Loving, Maid starts on side two, which is odd. Yeah.
I don't like that.
No, I don't either.
And Living, Loving, Maid has got its own groove. It just kind of, it almost, Heartbreaker kind of ends and then they just give you another shot, which is really nice. They don't do this. It actually doesn't really happen at all with two epic riff songs in a row like this. So it's really nice that you get a double shot, and Living, Loving, Maid is probably my favorite song on the album. If I had to pick one independent one, it might be that because of that riff. And he just keeps, again, just so effortlessly firing off these riffs so consistently. You don't hear it like he doesn't play it a little differently each time or sustain a different note. The riff is just driving, and he's devoted to it. Oddly enough, he said this is his least. Jimmy Page said that's his least favorite song. They never played it live.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He didn't like Living, Loving, Maid, but I do.
I guess maybe you can understand. I mean, it doesn't really sound like anything else on the album. It's faster. It's the fastest song on the album. It may be slightly more mainstream.
Yeah, it's definitely the shortest too.
Yeah. So it is an odd track for them. You don't really hear them do that kind of straightforward like riffing and just the speed of it too often. Because the solo is pretty short on this also. So it's almost like a mini, and maybe that's why they released it as a single, because it's almost like a mini version of Whole Lotta Love, where it's got the riff, unrelenting,
Whole Lot of Love, I think they had to cut down, but Whole Lot of Love has that whole middle part. It's instrumental, it gets echoey, and there's a lot of stuff going on. Living, Love, and Made is kind of the same thing. It's this unrelenting riff, but the solo is a lot shorter, and then they get back into the song, and I think it's really made for radio consumption, just on its own, but it doesn't stand up without Heartbreaker in front of it, kind of propping it up and getting you kind of juiced up, and then Living, Love, and Made comes in.
This is the kind of song that, to me, evokes, when you think of bands like Foo Fighters, just the kind of riffing that Dave Grohl does on a lot of those songs. And again, the speed of it, it's not the bluesy thing that you're used to hearing that Zeppelin does. And they would do like odd tracks along the way, but yeah, it's almost out of place. But with Heartbreaker, it's almost it's part of that. To me, it's part of Heartbreaker. It's part of that song. It's one for me. To split them up, it doesn't make any sense to me. But that's the way
they did it on the box set. So, I don't know.
This
was 1990, so this was pre-internet. So I couldn't go on a board. I couldn't Twitter it. Couldn't do much except for sit in front of the CDs and just stew in anger.
Yeah.
That it wasn't there. And then, but you know what? Brilliant on Atlantic Records, because then I had to go out and get the CD for Led Zeppelin II, and it exposed me to all the other stuff. So actually, kudos to Atlantic Records. You're very smart. You got me to buy a 4 CD box set, and then I bought the album anyway.
There you go.
Kudos. So next up, Ramble On. Now, if there were any geeks back in 1969, this was their song. This is where the Lord of the Rings references start to come in, and the fantasy elements. Mm-hmm. It's kind of one of those songs that you hear, and if you're into Lord of the Rings, or if you're into the fantasy stuff, and you hear this reference, and because it's basically what it's about. Great bass work by John Paul Jones. I mean, his fingers are just rolling on this song, just really supporting it. It's another riff-based song, but it's really for me, this is kind of like a Plant showcase.
Well, Plant, I mean, ultimately, I think he was into a lot of like English folk, and you hear that now, like nowadays he's doing that kind of thing. Solo wise, he's going out and all these different troops and whatnot. But I know he was a huge fan of Tolkien. And so this song really evokes that. Even without the Tolkien references in it, the song itself evokes sort of a fantasy type journey, road kind of Fellowship of the Ring thing. They're all on the journey kind of thing. And I love the rhythm, the sort of tapping that starts off and the acoustic guitars, and it slowly builds up, and it just, and again, when Plant kicks in with that vocal, it gives me chills like every time. It's like, the drum kicks in, and then his vocal just takes you to other places in this thing. So yeah, it's another great track, probably a little overplayed, I think.
You think so?
Really? Yeah, I think so. I think of all the songs off this record, I think it might be the one I like least, and only in the sense of it's just I've heard it like just a million times, and it's just one of the first Zeppelin songs that people tend to go to, I think.
Really?
So, yeah.
That's interesting. That's an interesting thought. I mean, I definitely recognized it when it came out, when I heard it. Not to the extent of the other songs on this album, but it is one of those songs that, like New York rock radio, like WNEW FM back in the heyday, they would go deeper into these albums. So this, again, this was it was a number one album, but certainly not a pop hit, a pop darling. It was a rock darling. And this is where those deep album cuts would come from, is when everybody was playing Heartbreaker or, Whole Lot of Love. It's like, okay, well, let's go even further. And I think Ramble On is only one of 2 songs that I know of that talk about Lord of the Rings. This one, and then there's a song called the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins by Leonard Nimoy on his album Highly Illogical, which I have. And he does a song about Bilbo Baggins and his adventures. So if you're looking for a companion piece to Lord of the Rings, you've got Leonard Nimoy with the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins. So that's kind of like that's like the prequel. So listen to Leonard Nimoy's song first, get that one in, and then listen to Ramble On, and you get the sequel. You get Lord of the Rings.
Well, actually, all of my love has referenced Tolkien as well. Just a couple of name drops, and that Proud Arion, and that's from Lord of the Rings as well. So for all you geeks out there, if you don't know, there's 2 songs right there that reference what you love. So check it out.
Two from Zeppelin and one from the golden throated vocals of Leonard Nimoy, which I actually really like that album. So I'm gonna stand on Ballad of Bilbo Baggins firmly as a good song also.
Oh, you like that better than Shatner? Come on.
Absolutely.
Really?
Nimoy, yeah, Nimoy actually tried to sing. That's why Shatner would give like a dramatic reading of like whatever he was singing. He would kind of act it. But if you listen to Leonard Nimoy had like a bunch of albums in the 70s. So he was actually like a recording artist proper. Yeah. And he did like If I Had a Hammer and Abraham, Martin, and John. So he actually was giving an attempt at it. It sounds like Spock singing.
Giving it a go.
But what are you going to do? So we'll take the on-ramp back onto Led Zeppelin II, and we're going to go next to Moby Dick, which is a whale of an instrumental. I've been waiting all week.
I'm sure you have.
I had that written like a week ago, and I'm like, I just kept it in my pocket. So this is a straight up instrumental. So there's no vocals. Plant sits this one out. And it is, again, it's riff based, but really it kind of like John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page kind of get it started, and then kind of see John Bonham off, into doing his own thing.
Yeah, this is Bonham's moment, if you will, in this, but not without, again, a great guitar riff in this song, and again evoking that what would become very familiar, very standard type of riffing going on in a lot of heavy metal music. So this song in particular for me, probably, just as much as Whole Lotta Love, just that riff, it just sounds so familiar to me. I felt like I've heard this before, and then you hear like later music and it's like, that sounds like Moby Dick. I felt like the first time I actually heard this, and this is not when I was a kid, by the way. I mean, I didn't listen to the entire album back then, but when I finally did listen to, I felt like I had heard this song before. It just sounded so oddly familiar to me. And I can't put my finger on it why, but it just did. And that happens from time to time in music. I heard my brother listening to it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was just stuck in my subconscious or whatever, but it just sort of, I heard this already. I know this. How do I know this?
It's certainly not one of Led Zeppelin's most known licks. I mean, we're talking about one album which has a wealth of these kind of riffs on it, and we didn't talk about The Ocean and Black Dog and all these other songs too. So Moby Dick is really going to be down on the list, but it does have something very familiar to it, and again, it just kind of keeps. He remains committed to it. Page, they just keep doing it and keep kind of pressing it, and then they let it go, and Bonham gets a really long extended drum solo. So I don't even know I wouldn't call it necessarily a drum solo.
It's not a solo.
It's not a solo like when you go to a concert and the guy's just doing everything. It really is him playing a song. He's not playing the riff of Moby Dick, but he's given the middle part of the song just to kind of do what he wants with it. And I don't say it's a drum solo per se.
It's not in a convention, in a conventional sense. It's more he's playing music is what he's doing. I mean, he's doing his own thing with drums. I mean, it's like somebody noodling with the guitar or a keyboard. This is John Bonham doing just that. And he was very good at it too. I mean, there were a couple of songs down the road that he would do the same thing. And this is a testament to his drumming. It's almost like, I really can't compare the two, but I mean, Neil Peart would do the same thing with odd time signatures and things like that. I mean, he would go off in these weird sort of rhythmic patterns and that kind of thing. And as a drummer, I totally appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. And you know what? A good contrast is how I mean, this is not like a drum solo. It's not like Ringo Starr playing at the end of Abbey Road where he's got these drum fills and he's, kind of filling it. Those are that kind of work that he was doing on the end of Abbey Road with Ringo, same year. those were kind of like drum solos, or they might have been, you could have called them longer fills.
Yeah.
That was more drum solo-y. What Bonham is doing is he's playing the drums as an instrument proper, as a part of a song. And then, Page and Jones meet him on the other side. They pick it back up and they see the song out. So it's a really nice, just a nice experiment and a nice listen. And it's definitely a change of pace too. It doesn't sound like anything else on the album aside of, the riff based, but everything else from it is different.
Oh, you know what it sounds like? Rock and roll hoochie coo. Dun, 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 right? That riff is there. There you go.
That would be Rick Derringer stealing.
Rick Derringer, yeah.
Again, there's no original ideas anymore, and that you might have something. I might have to go and YouTube that and see if someone's got a comparison with it already. I'm sure somebody does.
Just came to me. So, there it is.
Yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So the last song, oddly enough, is called "Bring It On Home," and it's credited to Willie Dixon. So someone got paid. I believe his record company went after Led Zeppelin on behalf of him. In this case, I'm not sure. I could be wrong. I think Willie Dixon wasn't even aware that they went after him. Maybe it was Howlin Wolf. There's so many lawsuits associated with this album. It's hard to keep track. So and here's the thing about this, about Bring It On Home, is it starts off with like a bluesy, really kind of like a processed vocal with harmonica. That part of it is what the lawsuit was about.
Yeah, because it's more traditional. It's much more.
That was the song
in the original arrangement. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then what I love about this song is when you're listening to it, you think, okay, this is how they're going to close out the album with something traditional, and it's got that really deep bluesy harmonica. No, I'm sorry. Jimmy Page is not going to let that stand. And what I love about it is because you got that whole beginning part with that vocal. It's about a minute long. So your ears actually get used to hearing that type of a processed vocal, whatever they did with it. So when they decide to change it and kick in, the instruments actually sound more alive and it almost sounds like a new band. And they just they kick the door down.
Well, it's basically, it's basically saying, this is what we're doing. This is what we're about. We're taking the traditional blues and we're changing it up. Right in the same song,
and it's such a great example, because the middle part is the stuff that they wrote. So they did kind of co-opt a song in the beginning and the end, and then the middle part is what they did with it, and it's absolutely brilliant because it totally fools you. You're kind of like, all right, I heard an instrumental, and then they're gonna see me off into the sunset with this bluesy thing, and they just kind of, nah, that's not going to happen. We've got more riffs in the chamber. And we gotta empty the cartridge.
It almost sounds like the song is going to fade out, like within 30 seconds of it. It sounds like this little odd sort of end piece, and then you think that's the end of the album. But no, like you say, they finish it off in style. So there it is.
Such a great listen. It's such an iconic album, and I'm so happy to be able to talk about this one. It's highly recommended. This is like rock and roll 101.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about, well, what should I listen to? Or I kind of like rock and roll and I've heard stuff, but I'm not sure. Led Zeppelin II should just be there because it's going to be something that you'll be able to go to and listen, and really the riffs just make it so easy and so fun. It's so fun to listen to because the riffs are just like, they just kind of roll off, and it's like, oh yeah, that, even if you never heard of it, it's so tuneful that it's enjoyable.
It's solid. As an end note, I mean, it's like Led Zeppelin is just one of those bands that you do take for granted that they are great in the few albums that they made from 69 to 79 in a decade. You wear them in your back pocket. You go on and you listen to other things. You're changing with the times, that kind of thing. They never really sort of deviated from what they were doing, but that. Yeah, I'm going to put on a Zeppelin album and it's going to be great. Yeah. So they would, this consistency would go on the whole 10 years that they would be together.
Yeah, I think it was you're right. It was a through line. Their sound did change. They did embrace like Over the Hills and Far Away. And some of these other songs. So there was a change. They didn't just stay this way, but there are chock full of Zeppelin albums that will have these iconic riffs. They all sound different too. It's not like he's recycling like I said, the ocean and custard pie, and there's just so many. Like this guy's like an endless like river of riffs that are each so unique, and he just plays them so effortlessly. Mm-hmm. And it really was the soundtrack of the 70s as far as rock radio goes. Zeppelin was there from the beginning, literally. I mean, I sometimes find it hard to believe that they actually started in the 60s, because I don't think of them as a quote-unquote 60s band. They are firmly, everyone thinks, oh, Led Zeppelin in the 70s. Well, not really. Like two other albums were before that, but they're so iconic to the 70s mm-hmm. that you just kind of think of it. And that's what, when you think of rock in the 70s, it's probably Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, those bands that were just still being prolific and carrying you through the 70s with those iconic sounds. So, this is one of them. So mm-hmm. So we've got some other subjects we need to hit. And I actually want to talk about the use of Led Zeppelin songs in movies, because it's not done a whole lot. But there was a song from this album, from Led Zeppelin II, that was used to such spectacular effect in really such a meaningful way. And that was Silver Linings Playbook.
Yes.
Where, there's a scene, if you haven't seen Silver Linings Playbook, we will probably end up doing an episode on it. It is a great film from David O. Russell. It's the first pairing of Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. And Jennifer Lawrence won the Academy Award for that. Bradley Cooper's character deals with bipolar issues and is prone to severe bouts of aggression. Mm-hmm. And this song, he had just basically come back from a conflicting situation for him. Let's put it that way. So he gets home to his parents' house and he wants to look for his old wedding videos, and he's trying to find the photographs. What Is and Should Never Be starts playing, and it fits in the manic episode that he's having so strongly. And I was like, and now when I hear it, I'm actually picturing that scene in my head. It is so connected.
Yeah. I just recently watched a miniseries called Sharp Objects that me and my wife, we just watched. And that whole miniseries is the Zeppelin's songs galore. They use almost 10 songs throughout the whole series. Because, Amy Adams is in that. She plays the title character. It's sort of a murder mystery kind of thing, revisiting your past. It's like a mystery. And she's like constantly in the car. And every time she's in the car, you hear a Zeppelin song. And it's not that just the hits. I mean, there's some deep cuts that they play in this thing. The Rover, like in my time of dying, 10 Years Gone. Those kinds of songs are in it too. But at the very end, I'm not gonna spoil it for anybody. But at the very end, there's a song that's used to great effect, and that's in the evening. Throughout the entire series, you hear just the beginning part with all that weird But at the very end, the song just kicks in at just the right moment, and it's amazing. I was like, that gave me chills, and it also just was like, wow, that was an amazing ending to this thing, just because of that song, So, yeah,
I think the winner for Led Zeppelin song use in a movie, hands down, is the Immigrant song in Thor Ragnarok. It is used twice. Yes. in that movie to such great effect, just because of the lyrics are kind of like "Come from the land of the ice and snow" and "Hammer of the gods." It's kind of. It's very Thor-ish. Mm-hmm. And when I first heard it in the movie, I got so excited. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they're using this song. I can't believe Led Zeppelin let them use it. And then at the end part of the film, they use it again when Thor really like powers up and really starts. Mm-hmm. And that's really when it really is used to even better effect, because it's blasting and you hear like Robert Plant wailing. And Thor is like throwing lightning bolts everywhere, and people are getting lit up all over the place. It's just, I think that as much as I love Silver Linings Playbook, I think Immigrant Song was really used well in Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, absolutely.
And kudos to Marvel for getting it, and kudos to Led Zeppelin for letting them use it.
Well, the best thing about Marvel is that they use all these great songs from the 70s, right? I mean, it evokes the Guardians sort of, keeping up with that, what Guardians started with, that tradition of old 70s songs. And even though Immigrant Song is familiar, it's like you say, you couldn't pick a better song. And
So
it's the
it
only
works so well.
song in the movie. Like it's the only song, and to play it again, especially when it was like, the hammers like, going around, and yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, usually like when you get a song, you use it once for the effect that it's wanted, but it was used twice, and both times it was used brilliant. The first time was a surprise. The second time was a surprise that it was used again, but it fit even better into what it was doing. It was almost it's so weird.
Well, it's a theme song for the movie, right? I mean, it's all about that too. Like at the very end, it's like they're all immigrating from one place to another.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So the song is just used to great effect. So yeah.
Let's talk about heavy metal. So there's a lot of stuff when I was doing research, and you hear it. Led Zeppelin is considered the father of heavy metal for some reason, or there's actually three names. There's three groups that were founded in the same year that are considered the fathers, or each one could lay claim to the crown of the father of heavy metal. So here's the three. So Led Zeppelin is the first one considered, okay, these guys invented heavy metal. Second one is Deep Purple, started in the same year. The third one is Black Sabbath. These groups were all founded in the same year. They're all talked about in the same breath as being the creators or the catalysts for heavy metal. What do you think?
Zeppelin, not so much.
I don't buy it.
I don't either. Maybe, like we were talking about, maybe this album would be the closest. You could see, just by the riffs alone, you could see why people would say that. But metal, to me, it seems like they were in it to be louder than the other. Black Sabbath, to me, is the one that truly kicked that off, I think. And then you go from them to like Iron Maiden, and then you go from them to
I don't think Deep Purple fits in this conversation either, though, because when Deep Purple first came out, they were kind of like a psychedelic. They were more of a psychedelic band, and they had songs like Hush, and so I don't think. I think people are going off of the reputation of what Deep Purple would come when Ian Gillan joined the band, and Smoke on the Water, and Woman from Tokyo, and stuff like that. But at the beginning, I don't see Deep Purple in that conversation. I see Black Sabbath. If I'm picking one of these three, if you listen to the early Black Sabbath stuff, that and the fact that their sound progressed into what would be heavy metal, I don't think. If you begin with Led Zeppelin, I don't think I can make a case for Led Zeppelin II to even sound like metal myself. It's blues, and it's not like they progressed into heavy metal. They when you get into the outdoor, they were using synthesizers, and not in a metal way. They were using them as atmospheric and as enhancement. So I can't see that.
If anything,
Led Zeppelin was a progenitor of heavy metal.
I would say they were more progressive band.
Yeah.
You can make that argument because they were constantly experimenting. They were constantly, doing more than just playing the riffs. They were, like we were saying, like Jimmy Page would go on to be doing, creating all of these textures and playing the guitar with the bow and getting these weird sort of sonic things. And it was all about creating sound and doing something different.
What I think it was, I think it was also the knockoff bands in the 80s is what did it. I think that's where Zeppelin got the reputation from. So there's bands like Kingdom Come was a band in the 80s. I think they were Danish or the European, and the guy obviously trying to sound like Robert Plant. So and these guys were metal, so a metal hair band. So then if they're trying to sound like Plant, then Led Zeppelin must have been metal. Jason Bonham, who's John Bonham's son, he had a band called Bonham, and they had a song, go look it up on YouTube, called Wait For You, and it sounds Kashmir-ish, but they're a metal hair band. So I think guilty by association that Zeppelin was an influence on heavy metal artists doesn't mean that Led Zeppelin was heavy metal.
Right. I agree. I totally agree.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think we can make the case for that. Now, that was and I think also because these groups in the 80s were so close to Led Zeppelin, it was kind of, like, these guys are kind of knocking off and it's metal. And it's kind of close, and it was obvious that these people were ripping off Led Zeppelin, and I don't think it was well received because Led Zeppelin was still hadn't been disbanded for very long, so it's kind of like, well, you're ripping these guys off, and they're really good, and you're just like, eh. Even Whitesnake to a lesser extent, the album Slide It In by Whitesnake with David Coverdale. I heard that and I thought it was Plant. I thought it was a Zeppelin album.
Yeah.
And I picked it up because it had that sound to it. So it was pervasive through the 80s, the influence of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now, and there's a group called Greta Van Fleet.
Mm-hmm.
And I highly suggest, if you haven't heard of Greta Van Fleet, I'm going to give you 2 songs to check out. There's 2 songs. One is called Highway Tune, and one is called When the Curtain Falls. Now, those sound like Zeppelin titles, first of all.
Yeah, yeah.
Highway Tune sounds like Lemon Song, so it's there. And when I first heard Greta Van Fleet, I was really like against them. I'm like, what are these guys doing? And it is. Highway Tune, the guy sounds like Robert Plant. The riffs are obviously adaptations of Page riffs. So that kind of bothered, at first it bothered me. I'm like, what are these guys doing? But then I kind of stopped and thought, I'm like, this is some 30, 40 years later. And these guys were young. They were like in their teens when they started doing this. And these guys found this as an influence and adapted it. This would be, to me, the equivalent of Zeppelin ripping off Howlin Wolf and anybody else basically doing those songs and redoing them, right? And stealing them. So when I looked at it that way, I'm kind of like, you know what? There's so much time that passed that I was kind of putting the 80s occurrence on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so much time has passed that it's almost been like 2 generations away. And Greta Van Fleet is embracing Led Zeppelin. Now they've already come out with a second album. They've already kind of started to move away from it. But listen to Highway Tune and When the Curtain Falls, and you will think, oh, wow, this was like unearthed Zeppelin stuff. Like I never heard this before.
I really haven't listened to the entire thing. I'm not familiar with them that much. I know of them. I've heard, but if they owned it, if they flat out said, we want to be Zeppelin, I'd probably appreciate that a little bit more, because at least they're honest about it. They're not, this is a thing, maybe a kitschy thing, maybe a sort of a, there are, groups out there that are just unabashedly trying to recreate something, and that's the stick. That is what they want to do. But I don't know if they've done that or not. Are they flat out admitting that?
They admit that Led Zeppelin is an influence.
Okay. Or influence. They're not trying to be Zeppelin.
They're not trying to be Zeppelin because they've already started to evolve that sound. But those 2 songs are so unmistakably Zeppelin that when you hear it, it's like, what is going on here? And that's kind of what irked me about it. But then I started thinking that this is so far removed that they're not trying to. Half the people that would be in their listening age audience would not even know who Led Zeppelin was. So what they're doing, honestly, is exposing. Hopefully, if someone says, "Oh, you're a ripoff," and then someone goes check out Led Zeppelin, well, they're going back in time and they're going to go check that out, and they'll see where the influence is.
Yeah.
And that's a win-win.
Yeah,
that's a win-win.
I'll buy it. So I'll buy that.
It's good stuff. Yeah, yeah. So I was like the jaded person of, what are these guys doing? And after listening and kind of thinking about it, I kind of turned around on them and kind of embrace it. Now when I hear it, I kind of get into it, because it's almost like, yeah, this is like hearing like Zeppelin style stuff, new and authentic. So they're not doing it with drum machines. It's a group of 4, and there's 3 brothers. The guitarist, the singer, and bass player are all brothers, and then the drummer is a friend. So there's a family thing there, and so there's a shared history of enjoying it. And there's if you go on YouTube and you search for Robert Plant, Greta Van Fleet, they ask Robert Plant about it, and he loves it. He's like, these guys are great. They are Led Zeppelin. He totally. I think for him it must be flattering, because I'm telling you, this guy's vocals his vocals hit the highs that Plant's used to hit. So he sings like Plant in that way. He can hit those high notes, and his vocalizations are very, very similar. So if you're looking for something recent and you don't want to go back to Led Zeppelin, go to Greta Van Fleet.
Now, are we talking about one album here, or did they make multiple albums that sound? Are they consistent with that, or
they put out EP? They put out an EP first,
okay,
which was kind of almost like their demo stuff, which was the Zeppelin sounding, and then they put out basically another EP, but they combined the two to make like an album. So that first body of work is really the Zeppelin stuff. They have a new album coming out really soon. They just released 2 singles from it. And the second single I heard, something machines in the title, it doesn't sound like it. It doesn't sound like it. So they're already folding
That's a good thing.
Folding in the Led Zeppelin experience. You're going to get if they tried to just do that, that's going to wear off pretty quick. They made their splash with it because they sound amazingly like Zeppelin in a good way. But now they're folding that in, and they probably realized, okay, we're here. Let's see where we're going to go with it next. So I look forward to seeing what other influences they have, because they're really very perceptive.
I was just about to say, if they made an album, next album sounded like another band, or they were trying to evoke something else, that would be cool.
I think Culture Club.
I
mean, they want to just try different things. So it's Zeppelin, Culture Club, and it'll be Tom Jones, I think, was
the only thing I know about them is there's a guy named Steven Wilson he's a prog musician today. He went back and he remixed some of the classic Yes albums and did like a sort of his own remix of them, which sound pretty damn good. I have to say, he's not a fan. I've read that he's like, these guys are a joke. They're a boy band. They're doing this kind of. He flat out despises them, and that's really the only thing that I've really heard about. I mean, I've heard of them that they do sound a lot like them, but I'm not familiar with it. So
give them a try. Give them a try.
Yeah.
So that's Led Zeppelin II. Back to '69, their influence. They actually Zeppelin II entered the charts again in 2014. Actually, was top 10 when they did a reissue of it. So it has the staying power. It's a perennial. It's got the riffs galore on it. So just kind of pull it up, put a headphone on, or just put it in the speakers, or put it on in the car, and you'll definitely be tapping your fingers to this thing one way or the other. If the first riff doesn't get you, there's going to be other ones coming behind that will get you.
Yeah.
So to wrap up and sum it up, if you're a fan of rock and roll, you need this in your life. That's the bottom line for Led Zeppelin II.
Yep.
So that's gonna do it for this episode of 3324. Want to thank everybody for stopping by, and we will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Erik Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.